For Ralph 2021, presented by Rangayan. Cree Foundation collaborates to bring you For Rang Charcha, a special session titled Biopics and Biographies, Framing Artists in Film and Writing, curated and anchored by Dr. Arshia Sethi. Namaste, welcome to Rang Charcha, Cree Foundation's contribution to Ralph 2021. In this age of biopics and biographies, do artists find any space? Who writes about them and why? We are going to hear this from some people who have written. Let me begin by asking first my dear friend, the least of her qualifications, Padma Shri, Professor of Theatre, great musician, Professor Rita Ganguly, about the two books that she has written as biographer. One of them is on Bismillah Khan. It's called Bismillah Khan and Banaras, the seat of Shehnai, and the other is on Begum Akhtar, E Mohabbat, reminiscing Begum Akhtar. Rita ji, welcome. Today I want to talk to you about these two biographies that you have written. And I feel it's a little strange that I'm talking to you about these two biographies because you have so many roles and so many accomplishments. But I feel that of all your roles, the most recent has been that of biographer. And so I ask you that you had the good fortune of being trained by so many great teachers and masters of our country. And yet the first biography that you write is on someone who is not your teacher, that is Ustad Bismillah Khan. Tell us how that happened.
Your question is rather funny because I had no intention of, I'm already been trained as a dancer, trained as a singer and recognized as a theatre person, recreating Natya Veda, fifth Veda, and according to the Natya Shastra. You have been also part of many productions that I did. But I never wanted to, nor am I a person of the literature. I'm vehemently against writing on celebrities. I have a student, and he was a very well-known celebrity, I shouldn't be saying my student, Vinod Dua. He came to my house in the beginning of 90s and said, Rita ji, I want you to write a biography of Ustad Bismillah Khan. And I was shocked. I said, how can you ask me? I am not a writer. So she said, no, our problem is that we are taking out series of well-known dignitaries, their biographies. It is a cosmopolitan publication known as Siddhi series, and Bismillah Khan has to be there. So go ahead, I'm sure many people will do it. No, but he refuses. He said that if you want to know about my life, then Urita ko bulawa, वो टेमटुम बोली बोला था ही. टेमटुम बोली मतलब अंग्रेजी, वो लिखी है हमारे बारे. So that is why we have come here. He refuses to talk to anybody else, and he is sure that you will do the justice. I did ring him up. I said, बिस्मिल्लाह जी आदाब, आप ये क्या बोल रहे हैं? मैं लिखिका नहीं हूँ. अरे तनी लिखा तो जो लिखोगे बन जाई है. ठीक है, आवा. So anyhow, I went there. And it was a brilliant experience meeting Bismillah ji. I happened to, that story which has gone round is also my contribution in the book, is that there was a person from America who was an ardent admirer of Bismillah ji and is a multimillionaire. He said, why don't you come and stay with us in America? She says, no way. I can't leave my place where I have been trained by my ustad, who happens to be also my mamu. He said, no problem. We'll lift the entire house and transport it to the place you choose to live in America, and we'll do it. No problem. Then he said, would you like to have a cigarette? So he offered him a cigarette and said, have some boiled eggs. That is his favorite dish that he offers whoever goes. So then he said that, I agree that you can take my house, you can take my children, but can you organize the early morning ghantis of Banaras? Can you organize the early morning, at least 200 shanks which starts in the morning? And moreover, you may be taking anything else, but not my Ganges. I don't want to go. He was a brilliant man, and it was a brilliant experience. After the book was written, I got a phone call, frantic, after the release. अबे बेटवा का लिख ले हो, इकर बहुत मुश्किल हो. मैंने कहा क्या हुआ? I believe you've written that to Bismillah Khan, playing Shehnai is ibadat. So the people, the Muslim Orthodox community is extremely angry and they want to say a fatwa against me. I told him, Khan Sahab, you know yourself that you're absolutely illiterate. He tells him I'm illiterate. I couldn't have written it. Whoever has written, you go and catch him and let them give me fatwa. I'll take it. Let's see. But Khan Sahab, when he went and I asked him about certain things about his life, he said, everything is there. How many you have given me hundreds of brochures? It says nothing, it only praises you and only gives me the account of the brilliant programs and brilliant things that you've done. This will not make a book. कहीं इश्क हुआ, किसी को अच्छा लगा, कहीं आप गए जो कुछ अलग था, या आपके बच्चों के साथ कोई तकलीफ, बीवी के साथ कोई तकलीफ या अच्छी चीज़ें, कुछ तो होगा. इस अरे नहीं हुआ या इश्क मुश्क होता है तो हम ऐसे बजा रहे थे. Agreed. Now Khan Sahab was, with great difficulty I could find out that there is a well-known actress, Sulochana. I have never seen it, it's before my time, that he liked her so much. He never met her in real life. They were called Tartwala because they were not allowed inside the house, not even giving a ordinary dari to them. So Hessian gunny bags were given to them to sit outside the house, outside the veranda of the house. That was the treatment they got. That today he is our Bharat Ratna.
Tell us a little bit about Begum Akhtar, who was to become your guru under rather exceptional circumstances. What is the story behind that, and who eventually inspired you to write the biography of Begum Akhtar?
Let me tell you, both the books that I've written, it's not that I wanted to write. There was no other way out but to write something about Ammi. Ammi means Begum Akhtar. And let me tell you, I did not go to Ammi to learn from her. I had no intention because I was a dancer. Siddheshwari ji wanted me to learn music and sing. Once I grow up and I stopped dancing, then I should be able to sing Thumri. That's why she wrote. And from there, Begum Akhtar took me as her disciple. And it is known, all these stories have been written, why they were alive. So I was taken from Siddheshwari Devi by Begum Akhtar to be trained. When I went to Begum Akhtar, there wasn't a soul learning from her. For a long time, they were all married and they were all settled, and Ammi was totally alone. There are a whole lot of people learnt. Not that only we three, Anjali Banerjee, Shanti Hiranand and Rita Ganguly learnt. The thing is, she said that, beta, mujhe zinda rakhna. 3 days before her death. मैंने कहा अम्मी ये क्या, क्यों इतने हैरान क्यों हो रही हो? तुम रोज कहती हो माँ अम्मा कुछ गुरु दक्षिणा दीजिए, गुरु दक्षिणा दीजिए. I said, how do I give you my, how do I keep you alive? When I started learning from Ammi, for 5 years, she did not touch alcohol. Then, at that time when she started drinking again, there was a person called Manmohan Talk. He insisted that he wants to write some biography of Begum. She said, I'll tell you everything, but on one condition, only when I die. There are many things I would like to tell you, but not till I die. It should be published after my death. And she told me, I went for a dance program all over Germany just before that, and I brought a Uher tape recorder, spool. So there was spool Liana, hum record karenge. So what she did, I went next day with that Uher tape recorder, and she recorded the whole thing. After that, she said, I'll put few more, तरजी आप जाइए, हम आप हमारी बिटिया से ले लीजिएगा. उसके बाद न मनमोहन तलक कभी आए और न मैंने उनको ढूंढ के निकाला, लेकिन मिला नहीं. So that tape in which from her birth till her death, I mean till her last days, she told in that thing. I had that very, very precious recording. With that, I wrote The Story Must Be Told. I don't know how much you have read my book. The book has different chapters, what others well-known people have spoken about her, and a solid area which is her life. Nobody has done that before me or after me. The work, whatever she did, whatever she told, not necessarily that I would write it the way she said. I did go. I did do my research. That is how I applied the Ford Foundation. First, of course, I tried for Nehru Fellowship, then Bhawar Fellowship. Both the places I was selected, but I was lucky enough to become the fellow of the Ford Foundation. With that grant, I could do many things. Amrita Pritam, incidentally, was a great admirer of Begum Akhtar, and all the program that she heard of Ammi was where I supported her in music. It's Amrita Pritam, when I was doing Sufism research, then she called that, why are you not writing a book on your Ustad? And she was convinced that would be very good and authentic. That is why she has written the foreword of my book.
Rita ji also created a solo play on Begum Akhtar, Jamal-e Begum Akhtar.
लेकिन क्या हुआ? वही सा 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 रे ग म प द नि द नि र ब म ग आ आ आ और ये रोज ही एक दिन वो फिर उसी तरह से बोल दी. आप सारे गामा गाते हैं, गाना गाते हैं. गाना भी गाने, पहले सारे गामा तो गा लो, फिर गाना भी गा लेना. अच्छा सा गाना. क्यों क्यों आप उन्हीं का चंदाबाई जैसे अले छम छम अली छम छम बाजे पायलिया आज मोर अंगना। देखो साहब, जरा इधर आइए, मेरी बस की बात नहीं। ऐसो तो बेकार है भी गाना गाना, साढ़े को ऐसे पक्का गाना गाने हो, छोड़ दो, नहीं सिखाऊंगा। दूसरे दिन कहा कि हमारे पंजाब मिल में कर दीजिए, लाहौर में चला जाऊंगा। ठीक, बात बन गई। अब वो नहीं सिखाएंगे बीबी को, लेकिन सवेरे उस्ताद लोग रियाज तो अपना करेंगे दोपहर की गाड़ी। अला जाने अला जाने अला जाने अला जाने नबी अली को नूर भर रहो। और दिव्य को वो गाना बहुत अच्छा लगा। वो आके पूछा, मैं अंदर आ सकती हूँ? हाँ जाओ, क्या बात है, ये गल है? हाँ, मैं ऐसे गा सकती हूँ? बिल्कुल गा सकती हूँ, लेकिन रियाज करना पड़ेगा। मैं रियाज कर लूँगी, मैं ऐसे ही गाना गाना चाहती हूँ। हाँ, तब तो मेहनत करना पड़ेगा। कहा साहब, मैं मेहनत कर लूँगी, मैं दूध भी पी लूँगी और घी भी खा लूँगी, पी लूँगी, सवेरे उठ के आ भी कर लूँगी, मुझे ऐसे गाना चाहिए। शुरू हो गया, वो रियाज करना शुरू करी। उसको एक मोटिवेशन मिला कि ऐसे गाना चाहिए। वो चंदाबाई से भी अच्छा है ये गाना।
What a fascinating person she is, Rita ji. I tell you, this conversation could have carried on endlessly, but I do want you to meet some of the other people who have written biographies and created biopics. You are watching a session on biopics and biographies, framing artists in film and writing, curated and anchored by Dr. Arshia Sethi, founder and managing trustee, Cree Foundation, for Ralph 2021. The next person I would like to introduce you to is Gauri Ramnarayan, art critic for The Hindu and also biographer, playwright, and an extremely talented singer as well. She's going to talk to you a little bit about that. So let me just begin by welcoming Gauri to today's program. Thank you so much for joining us, Gauri. You have written this most amazing biography on MS Subbulakshmi. You were also closely related to her and accompanied her for many years as a singer. How difficult is it to distance yourself from the person you're writing about so that you get an unbiased representation?
I was the legendary Carnatic vocalist MS Subbulakshmi's vocal accompanist for 17 years. I was also her grandniece. For all practical purposes, her granddaughter, because my father, who was an orphan, was her nephew and she raised him. So people very often asked me, Gauri, did you find it difficult to write MS Subbulakshmi's biography? You knew her all your life. How could you draw the line between the public and the private aspects of her life? My answer is simple. I cannot set aside my personal bond. However, as a long-term journalist, I have been trained to be objective. And I'll tell you what happened the day she was in the hospital with just a few hours to live. My editor called me from the office and said, "Get yourself here right now and write her obituary." I was grief-stricken. I was shaking. I said, of course I couldn't. And he told me, "Look, you have a duty as a journalist. Besides, who can write about her as you can? Come here." And I did go to the office. I did write it in a flood of tears, but with a clinical neutrality that came in from my training. And I was lucky. I was able to go back to the hospital and be with her in the last hours of her life. In writing the story of MS Subbulakshmi, I have avoided salacious gossip. It's unsubstantiated anyway. But I was not afraid of truth and fact, even if they center staged unflattering issues or conflicts. I'll give you an example. MS never wanted to acknowledge the fact that she had this Devadasi heritage. She came from the courtesan community. She once told me, "You cannot imagine the humiliations I faced as a young girl." So, who knows the trials she underwent which made her want to forget it? This is from her personal life. I'll give you an example from her professional life. Sometimes she would say rather sadly about being idolized, but the fact that she was not recognized for her musicianship. I never forgot her guru telling me once, "Your grandmother would have been a greater musician if her husband had not made her sing for Gandhi and Nehru." There was a certain truth to that. As her biographer, I did not shy away from the fact that MS was the people's musician. She was a popular musician. She was not a musician's musician that she aspired to be.
You have written as art critic for The Hindu for so many years. Now, very often you have also written biographical pieces. What is the challenge of writing a biographical piece for a newspaper, for instance?
I worked for The Hindu for a very long time, writing about theatre, music, dance, literature, films, all cultural issues. I was hardly aware of the fact that what I was writing might have any shelf life. But now I find that due to the opportunities I had, and because I traveled so widely to source my stories, I have recorded a great deal of biographical and historical information about artists, about revival attempts, about the dying traditions, avant-garde movements, experiments, and cultural innovations. Very often, people do write to me and ask me for this or that article, which they use for their PhD thesis, books, as well as sometimes documentaries as well. All that I have learned as a journalist has gone into my work as a playwright and as a theatre director.
Gauri, you have written several plays as well where you have used arts extensively. But you have also written plays about artists. So talk to us how you convert an artist's character for a play.
The arts have always been integral to my work. I compose music to say what I cannot say through words. I add martial arts movements and dance in order to bring in more dimensions. And I also use paintings in different ways. In a production called Yashodhara, we had 2 paintings of the Buddha on the stage, big ones. And they brought the character to the stage. In another production called Fire and Ash, we used 6 paintings in succession in order to create tangible and visual enactments of the abstractions that we wanted to convey. But the question I'm asked most frequently is this: how did you write your plays with people who were living before your eyes, people who were great, famous, contemporary artists, people whom everyone knew in flesh and blood? How dare you turn them into characters on the stage, and how can you make them credible? I really don't know how to answer this question except to say that it's like looking at an impressionist painting. You go too close and all you see are the blotches. You go too far and you see the blur. The trick is to arrive at the exact spot where between the blotched and the blurred visuals in order to arrive at a sharp focus. But I can say what impelled me to write a play on Arun Kolatkar, the bilingual poet. It was a frenzy of mourning when I heard that he was dead. You cannot really describe what poetry does to you, but you can say that whether the world knows it or not, and most of the time the world doesn't know it, especially in the case of a poet like Arun Kolatkar, who was eccentric and enigmatic and reclusive, the death of a great poet is a loss to the world. It diminishes all of us. I had met Kolatkar just once, but it was many years before I wrote the play. So I could not create this character from life. Never mind, I had his poetry, and his family and friends who came to see the play found that my Kolatkar was extremely credible and sounded true to them. I guess we all know the truth that a man is revealed in his work. The other play that I wrote with a person who had lived amongst us and not so long ago was called Enchantment. And it is about the Krishna of the Indian classical music world. Yes, you've guessed it, Pandit Ravi Shankar. I had known Panditji from my childhood, and he himself has written 2 autobiographies, and he's the most written about Indian artist anyway. But it's not all this wealth of material that helped me, so much as a few details that he unconsciously let fall when he was talking, with tremulous glances, with tears almost standing in his eyes, and his voice nearly choking, when he recalled all the regrets of his life. And so you see, I discovered the man in his sorrows, in his vulnerabilities, not in the moments of great triumph and success. We were going to premiere Enchantment in the US. We were going on a tour. This was in March 2020. But you know what happened? COVID changed the world. The tour got cancelled, and I don't know if we are ever going to see this play on the stage.
I hear and see that you are now involved with a very big project. I call it your Kalki project. So tell us a little bit about this Kalki project. Where is it going, and what should we expect from it?
After working for an entire year, I have managed to translate the massive biography of the iconic Tamil writer Kalki Krishnamurti into English. This book will be released in December 2021. Now, why did I undertake this back-breaking project? Well, during the lockdown, I was reading this biography in original Tamil to my siblings on Zoom sessions, and all 3 of us realized that this work is not about an individual and his achievements. This is actually the saga of the first 50 years of 20th century India and its freedom struggle. I felt that I must translate it so that this wealth of material, this extraordinary book, may be available to those who do not know Tamil. And Kalki was, of course, inspired by the national movement to become an activist and then a journalist. He went on to become a celebrated writer and a pioneering giant of the Tamil press. This biography shows how Kalki used his extremely powerful pen to trounce all kinds of regressive ideologies in politics, in society, in education, in the arts, just about everywhere, and how he propagated the anti-colonial struggle, Gandhian ideals, and the reformist causes, not to forget the Renaissance drive. Now, about the book, what can I say about it? My translation is titled Kalki Krishnamurti, His Life and Times. What can readers expect from it? Well, first of all, though the book is absolutely rooted in Tamil, Tamil Nadu, Tamil culture, it has a national sweep, national vision. It makes me understand my heritage as an Indian. it also shows me my responsibilities as a citizen of the world. It makes me aware that I must fight corruption, injustice, violence wherever I find it, without fear, but with compassion. I hope the readers too will find all these experiences in my translation of the Kalki biography.
Thank you, Gauri, for sharing such an interesting journey with us. Our next author of a biography is herself a dancer, Dr. Ileana Chittoristi. Today, more Indian than Italian, she came to India 40 years ago, learnt Chow and Odissi. Today has made her home in Bhubaneswar, where she dances, teaches dance, and writes about Odishan culture. She has also written a very important biography on her guru, The Making of a Guru, Kelucharan Mahapatra, His Life and Times. Hello, Ileana. So nice to have you with us on this program.
Hello, Asha, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to remember those beautiful moments which I spent with Guruji.
My first question to you is, how did you get the idea of writing this book, and how did you convince Guruji about it?
That was in June 1999, in the middle of the night after Guruji would finish his classes. And we would sit under the sky, open sky, pre-monsoon, with breeze, and he would be quite happy to go back to his childhood, remembering his guru, all the gurus, and all the people who were important in his life. And the idea to write a book on his life was given to me by a young publisher from Delhi. I met him very casually in a social gathering, and he told me that you have been with Guruji for 25 years and there is no book on his life, so why don't you write? So I had never thought about it, and when I came back to Bhubaneswar, I told Guruji, and immediately he said, yes, why not? Actually, he always was very open to everything new, to any new venture. So that also excited him. And so then I started to take it seriously. Unfortunately, after a few months, when I ran back to talk with this young publisher, I came to know about his tragic end, his tragic death. He had just had a stroke, and so he was no more. So suddenly I found myself starting the book, and without having any experience about the publishing houses and all these things, because it was the first time I was actually writing the book. But I said it, I started, so I have to continue. So later on, by searching here and there, Sangeet Nataka Academy actually gave me the advice to propose it to Manohar, and this is how the book came through. And the launch was on 29 April 2001. 29 April specifically I chosen because of the World Dance Day, so it would be a proper date and also easy to remember. And and for the launching, Guruji was there, Kapila ji was there. I remember the Italian ambassador was there, and myself. And it was so nice hearing from Guruji saying, when he did his speech, that I don't know what, and I cannot read what Ileana has written, but I have full faith in her.
Share some interesting anecdotes from when you were writing the book.
I remember once in a while when he was talking, he would a little bit feel sleepy, and then suddenly again waking up, and started again from the same point, continuing. He always been very active and very creative in the night, the middle of the night. So for him, late night was not a problem. Then he would call his wife, Guruma, and ask him something when he couldn't maybe remember or just to check. Of course, she has been such an important element, such an important person in his life. It's been his inspiration. So for me, it was like the third phase of my relationship with him. I would really follow him everywhere. So whenever there was a class going on any part of India, I would be there. Then the second, I consider it when I started to build my house. That was around 96, 97. And he became my consultant, my advisor, because he had experience in that also. And the third phase, I became his biographer.
What were the challenges you faced while writing this book, Ileana?
The major preoccupation, one of the preoccupation was to give a certain chronology, certain sequence to an events, because whatever I was collecting, it was all in memory from him and from all the people whom were still alive, and it was those years were maybe the right years to write, because after a few years, many of them had passed away. But people say in their 70s, late 70s, 80s, still with a lot of memory, which were part of that particular phase, so hectic phase in the performing art of Kathak, Orissa, Kathak and Puri. And in the Ras Leelas, in the theatre, the first years of the revival of the dance. So those people were still alive, and many of them were not known, or at least we didn't know about them. So even after having been here in the field for so many years, many of them I had never heard me. So for me it was a continuous discovery to find people that have been so important in those years, and for the revival of this art form. Whatever Guruji would tell me, then I would be able to cross-checking with them and see what kind of memory they would have of the same event. And then maybe sometime come back to Guruji and ask if anything was a little bit to be clarified. So this was the work to be done. But then to put all these events in a certain chronology and a sequence, that, because the people would remember a lot, but remembering dates was almost impossible, and for them. And there was no written, all the article or books which were already available, they would deal with the previous period. So all the sculpture, the Mahari, the Gutipua, all the history of the dance up to that point. But of the last century, almost nothing was written. And all these people were actually people who were the main character of this phase of the performing art. So, and another difficulties was also, apart to the date, also to create a balance between whatever I was getting, so many information I was getting, but I didn't want to deviate too much from the basic purpose of the book, which was to talk about Guruji's life. So how much I could amplify and how much I could involve and include also all these other things which I was discovering, all these other people who were being part of the scenery, and without going too much out of the main purpose of the book.
You know, I can imagine many benefits coming to you from writing this book. You met many people who were important in the revival of Odissi. You spent a lot of time with Guruji. You also managed to meet people you would not have otherwise met, people of the older times, right? What were the additional benefits of writing this book?
I was happy that with my going to these people and interviewing them, not only I could give some to highlight their contribution, but also I somehow revived their relationship with Guruji. That in the meantime maybe had been a gap because his life had gone on a certain way, and so many of them they came back to him, and he was very happy to reconnect with them. So I involuntarily I was being also a medium of interconnection again between them. And in the process, of course, I learned a lot.
They say you have to be distant while writing a biography. But here was the man you were meeting every day. You were training with him, you were going with him on tours, traveling. He was so close to you. How then did you maintain that element of distancing that is essential?
Yeah, the fact that I was very close to Guruji, didn't actually, because I didn't put my personal experience with Guruji. I kept myself just trying to highlight the sequence of the historical setup, which whatever historical was important and how these things contributed to his life, but also at the same time on the evolution of the dance, because he was actually belonged to the time in which all these things was happening. So some anecdotes of me with him also I introduced, but in the same way like I introduced anecdotes which I collected from other of his students, because I interviewed as many students as possible, senior and mostly senior students, and apart from all these other people which were part of the previous time of the theater phases and Raslila phase and all these things.
Ileana, you must have needed to speak to a whole host of people to be able to sort of get those fill in the gaps information. You know, bits that he may have forgotten or forgotten to tell you about, which you were not able to triangulate through any of the archives.
Unfortunately, the people who were so much part of the cultural scenery of those years, and which Guruji was referring to in his telling, they were still alive in their late 70s, early 80s, middle 80s, and with a lot of still memory, because being artists and ex-actors or dancers, they still had a lot of alertness. So I could have the opportunity to cross-check with them whatever Guruji was referring and was remembering. And then if there was some discordance or something to be clarified, I could come back again to Guruji to clarify that. So that was an important part of the process, because nothing was written. Everything was depending from the memory of the people. And of course, memory, they had good memory, but the dates, for example, were almost impossible to get from them. So that was an exercise which I had to slowly develop and try to make a chronology. And if there was something divergency or something to be clarified, I could still come back to Guruji and clarify it or asking him or whatever. So that possibility was there.
So I've already mentioned the word archives, and it brings me to the next question, which is, where did you get the old photographs and any archival material?
Regarding the documentation, whatever photo I could dig up and I could find, there were not many. In fact, Guruji went through a lot of, because there is a lot of cyclone, floods and all these things. So many of his old papers and old documents were flooded many times, and so he didn't actually have much with him. Then some old photo Srujan and his son has given to me, and some paper cutting, some photo from the papers, and whatever also old photos we had a little bit to readjust and repair. So of course, dance photo of the present time would have been have plenty, but it was, after all, it was a book on his life, so you cannot just present the present, and so that has been a little bit laborious, and then also the people to whom I was going to talk with, very few of them they had old photo. Of course, I tried also to go to a particular shop in Cuttack, which was the only one existing in the 30s and 40s and 50s, one of the few. But they also told me, no, Papa, my father has lost all the negatives or something like that. So documentation is incredible also in Kalavikas Kendra, which is one of the major institutes where Guruji also spent quite a lot of time, about 10, 12 years. There also, they didn't have much documentation.
Did he ask to see the work before you published it? How much involvement did he have, or editorial control did he have? And what was his reaction when you put the book in his hand?
When finally the book was ready, I came back from Delhi with the first copy, and I went to Guruji's house, and I said, Guruji, close your eyes. He didn't know what I was going to do. So close your eyes. And then he closed the eyes, and I put the book like this in front of him. Okay, now open. Ah, it's so nice. He was so happy, and then immediately called his wife, Jaru, Jaru, Jaru comes. And they went through all the photo of the book. He never asked me what you wrote here, what you wrote there, what is written now. They went on, and there was the photo of them when they were young, when they married, then the photo of the first daughter, then the photo of his guru, the guru, that Mahasundar Goswami, then all these things were there, so he was enjoying all the photo. And always again he called his wife, and together they went through it. So I'm very happy to have done this book, and it's for me a small homage which I could do, I could do for him.
Thank you, Ileana, for sharing such delightful insights with us. I next bring on a very senior Kathak dancer and guru, Shama Bhateji from Pune. Shama Bhateji is presently writing a biography. Actually, she's co-writing that biography, and so will bring a very interesting aspect to our understanding of how biographies are written. I am actually one of the co-writers, but I thought it would be better for you to hear from her of how this process works. And actually, this is the only work we are featuring where the process is still on. So welcome, Shamaji. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about this book that is being co-written. Tell our audiences how that works. Tell us also whether you feel that there is an increase in the number of writings that are biographical, and if the arts are getting their relevant percentage in this writing.
Yes, Arshaji, that is my favorite topic. So I definitely would like to say something. If I could have it my way, I would have more books and more biopics and more documentaries. I feel very, very sad that there are very few, not very much written on dance or dancers. Leave aside biopics, not even documentaries. So it would be just right to have more and more books. The book on Munraji Kalyanpurkar is a collaborative effort. Shilpa Bede, she is my student, but she is writing more in the capacity of a very a dancer, but also a very good writer. She is very good at languages. So in that capacity, because it is your idea to come out with a book, and I felt that I ought to support this because first of all, I have immense respect for Monravji. Then I feel the book should be written for the posterity, and this book is very important because I see the future generations, the generations of today don't know Mohanrajji, and they should know about the people, not just gharanedars, but the non-gharanedars who really contributed to this world of Kathak, especially after independence. So there is the necessity for this book. And we have our designated roles. Shilpa is the one who's doing the research, interviewing people, and writing the book. You are the one, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm telling the viewers that Arshia is the one who is looking after the literary standard of the content, helping us interview the artists who are based in Delhi. And on the whole, she's taking the overview. And I'm the one who's the bridge between the two of you, and also the artists, maybe the generations who would, the targeted audience, Mohanrajji's family, Mohanrajji's disciples, etc.
I'd like to end by asking you a very interesting question. When the person is no more, who owns the story? Is it fans? Is it students? Is it the family? Who owns the person's story?
I think that's a tricky question to ask, isn't it? According to me, people, artists like Mohanrajji or even my own Guruji Rohiniji, they don't belong to a family or even to the family of disciples, or they are national property, national wealth. So all they possess in terms of intellectual property is national wealth, and it should be preserved and restored for posterity, for the next generations. That is number one. And nowadays it is possible to make a documentation by digitizing things, and I think there should be a systematic effort by the person's disciples, admirers, family, to restore it, not think about these things in a possessive manner. That's how I feel. And let it spread. And that's how the dance will go further. We all ought to think about the form. As we all know, at one time there was no possibility of videographing things. There was the sensitivity was such that people wouldn't write, people were possessive and wouldn't teach with generosity. Now the things have changed. So I feel that this wealth should be really accessible to each and everyone who's interested. For one person who might not be worthy of it, 10 other worthy people shouldn't be deprived of it. That's how I feel.
Thank you so much, Shamaji, for sharing all this with us. I promise to complete my work, and we all look forward to this book coming out on Pandit Mohan Rao Kalyanpurkarji. It'll be a very big and important addition to writing on dance. You are watching a session on biopics and biographies, framing artists in film and writing, curated and anchored by Dr. Arshia Sethi, founder and managing trustee, Cree Foundation, for Ralph 2021. And here I would like to bring on Ratnotma Sengupta, the arts editor for the Times of India, my editor when I, as a rookie critic, began writing on dance for the Delhi Times of India. Ratna, welcome. It's such a joy to have you with us. My first question to you is a little autobiographical, actually, and that is, you grew up in a very interesting household in very interesting times. As the daughter of Nabendu Ghosh, who was the writer for Bimal Roy, you not only encountered Bimal Roy but many other very interesting people of the time who were pioneers. How did your location, that lottery of birth, as it were, benefit you?
I guess, it's you propose, or you may think you're planning your life, but life actually plans your journey. It's like a plot of land you've bought decides the architecture that will come up on it, the shape of the house, the building. I guess the fact that I was born to Nabendu Ghosh and Kanaklata decided what I am today. Because even before I could read alphabet, recognize ABC, I had started recognizing images. I used to pick up books, I used to look at the images, I would look at photographs, I would look at the covers and try to understand what was happening in the book, and so on. So my journey with letters actually started even before I could recognize letters. Being born to and raised in the household of Nabendu Ghosh, I had seen them from my childhood, and how I had a memory of seeing Bhuvan Shom when Mrinal Sen previewed it for Rishikesh Mukherjee, Nabendu Ghosh, and Tapas Sen, Light Maestro. I was the innocuous, totally ignored 10, 11, 12 year maybe. But the impact it had on me, this was even before its release. And it was for me a milestone in cinema. We, in any case, saw very little cinema those years. But this viewing molded my perception of cinema, of parallel cinema, what was to be parallel cinema or art cinema in the subsequent years.
You have made a wonderful biography on your father, Nabendu Ghosh, called And They Made Classics. Now, I want you to share with us that story of that moment of serendipity when suddenly you were given material by which you could make this documentary on your father.
That's almost an hour-long documentary which I made for Baba's centenary. That was in 2017. But this interview was taken by Joy Bimal Roy when he was making, he set out to make Remembering Bimal Roy, the documentary he did for his father, Bimal Roy, in his centenary year. But Joy had started by recording Nabendu Ghosh, Joy and Aparajita Sinha, his sister. They had recorded him for about 2 hours, and but as it happens in the documentary, he could use only about say 2 or 3 minutes of the recording. So he gave me the rest after the film had been made and been had journeyed to different festivals and had been in Panorama and so on. So he gave me the interview and he said, I couldn't use all of it obviously, but I'll be very happy if you can use it. And that interview was lying with me. And suddenly when we were approaching the Nabendu Ghosh centenary, I suddenly remembered and I said, why not try and make use of that? I'll be eternally grateful to my friend, and who's more than a friend, of course, who's no less than a brother, and to Aparajita Di for sharing this, because I culled about 20 minutes of narrative. Nabendu Ghosh talking about his experience of writing for Bimal Roy, and I added clippings and I added posters and I added stills, photographs, and I had material that I could obviously not have got 10 years after the man had ceased to be in body. So here I was with only one constraint. That was Nabendu Ghosh had talked about his work with Bimal Roy. Bimal Roy was his film guru. Bimal Roy had taken him to Bombay when all the doors were closing in Bengal after partition. It was difficult for a writer who was making his living solely by his pen. His books, the market had got divided. He was doing screenplays for Bengali cinema, which were not being released or screened in the other half of Bengal. That had got cordoned off by the Radcliffe line. So all the avenues had closed, and Bimal Roy asked him to join him on the journey to Bombay to make films for Bombay Talkies at the behest of Ashok Kumar. So these are two key names in the life of Nabindu Ghosh. Bimal Roy recognized in Nabindu Ghosh the ability to put in words visuals. Visuals, he wrote a very graphic narrative. And having recognized this, he invited him to be his screenplay writer. And he went to Bombay. But from the very beginning, Bimal Roy was not the only director he was writing for, because he was sought after by some of the famous names of those time, like Vijay Bhatt, like Satyan Bose, like Guru Dutt, like Gyan Mukherjee, like Fani Mujumdar. All these people, they asked Nabindu Ghosh to do screenplays for their films. So he was parallelly writing for others. But of course, with Bimal Roy, he wrote 9 feature films. Almost all of them are classics. He also wrote the screenplay for 2 of the documentaries on Swami Vivekananda and Gautama the Buddha, one of which got an award at Cannes. Well, having said that, for the documentary, how could I bring this part in when Nabindu Ghosh himself is talking about the 9 films he has done with Bimal Roy? I had to additionally bring in posters, clips, a few that were available or relevant. Even more difficult was the fact that Bimal Roy passed away in 66, and Nabindu Ghosh lived on for at least 40 more years after that, almost half a century, that saw the world change, world of cinema change, and not only the world of cinema, but the world change actually, with the Berlin Wall falling, with the Iron Curtain going, and so much else happening, globalization in India. Nabindu Ghosh, after Bimal Roy passed away, he became a guest. He was invited to be a guest lecturer at the Film and Television Institute of India from 1966 to 1991, 25 years, which kind of transformed the landscape of Indian cinema. These years, when he joined, the students were people like Kumar Shani, Jaya Bhaduri, Adur Gopal Krishnan. Subsequent years had students like Saeed Mirza, Girish Kasarwali, Kundan Shah, Ketan Mehta, Shubhankar Ghosh, my brother. All these people went on to make the new Indian cinema. Shyam Benegal, Govind Nihalani, of course, they were already there on the scene, but they also had grown up watching Bimal Roy films, and they have acknowledged the role that these films and the screenplays for these films had played in their life. Kumar, in fact, at one point of time, he said, "Her father taught me, and I taught her brother, Shubhankar." So, Nabindu Ghosh became the bridge between the golden years, which saw Bimal Roy, Guru Dutt, K.S.F., Mehboob making, Raj Kapoor making their films, and with the subsequent generation that grew up under NFDC. When my brother was in FTI, I was also, I used to spend time with him in the classrooms or in the canteen, and so many of his friends, they would all sit and chit chat or watch films and dissect it, and I would be the silent listener, absorbing like a sponge everything that was being said. So that is how I grew up, and this is how I imbibed a lot of the new generation perspective as well, which helped me when I went on to film appreciation lectures, or when I started doing my reviews, or when I started editing books or writing biopics, bioessays. Now, about the serendipity. Had it not been for Joy and They Made Classics would not have got made. Had it not been for that interview that was lying unused, untapped, we would not have such a detailed account of the making of classics like Sujata, Bandini, Yahudi, Madhumati, Biraj Bahu, Baap Beti, Ma, so many of them more. Why am I talking about this? These films also, in talking about these films, he also talks about the difficulties faced, the choices faced by a master, a maestro, cellular maestro like Bimal Roy, like when he talks about the ending of Bandini, the commercial forces that he had to withstand, and the decision he took, and the role Nabindu Ghosh also played in helping him come to that decision, or some of the departures from a book, a literary masterpiece like Devdas, like when Parvati and Chandramukhi cross each other, he talks about it. And at the same time, he also talks about how Dilip Kumar would insist, or Nutan would insist, on Nabendu Ghosh being there when the scenes were being described, how the screenplay writer contributed to their understanding and their preparation for the scenes, which eventually are recognized as their milestones in their career.
At that time, we were passing through a bad time because Bimalda was a producer too. The previous films didn't fetch enough. So we discussed and settled on Sharad Babu, and Bimalda proposed Devdas. Why Devdas? Devdas is out and out a love story. Being a tragedy, it's all the more it has become everlasting. Dilip at once was selected for Devdas. But who will do Parvati? So we approached Meena Kumari. Meena Kumari gladly agreed. But I heard Mr. Kamal Amrohi, who was also a great filmmaker and producer, he objected that the shooting should not be held in outdoor and Devdas should not touch Parvati's hands. Bimalda, and he said, no, then we are not going to take Meena Kumari. Then Suchitra Sen was being negotiated. In the meantime, for Chandramukhi, we approached Nargis. Nargis said, I shall be very glad to act in Bimalda's films, but please give me Paro's role. We were in a dilemma because Chandramukhi is slightly elderly. Then we approached Bina Roy. Bina Roy also repeated the same thing. Then we approached Suraiya. Suraiya was going out of films, but even then we thought that she has immense potential. She also is there to role Paro. And when Suchitra Sen of Bengal was selected for Parvati's role, Meena Kumari heard the news. She wept. So then who is going to do Chandramukhi? Our distributors wanted a box office name. So Vaijantimala came forward to meet Bimalda and said, if you think I can do the role. On the first shooting day of Devdas, we found that Dilip Kumar, we used to call him Yusuf Bhai. Yusuf Bhai is loitering and away from us, he's loitering and in deep thought. I said, what has happened? Yusuf Bhai comes and sits with us and jokes. So I went to him and said, Yusuf Bhai, क्या हो गया? बोला कि नवेंदु बाबू वो तीनों मेरे कंधे पे बैठे हुए हैं. तीनों कौन? बोला कि बरुआ साहब, Saigal Sahab, because they played the role of Devdas. Saigal in Hindi, Barua in Bengali. Barua Sahab, Saigal Sahab और शरद बाबू, ये तीनों मेरे कंधे पे बैठे हुए. I asked him, What do you think of Sharat Chandra, Yusuf Bhai? He said, he has divinity in his pen. To me, the film is a synthesis of all the existing art forms. That's why a film director also must be aware about the story, about the visual, about their performance, how the characters will move. That means acting.
वहाँ दादू है, माँ है और
चुप रह बे, तेरे कारण तो और भी मुसीबत हो गई। क्या करूं, कहाँ जाऊं, कुछ समझ में नहीं आता। क्या बात है? भूख लगी है? कुछ खाएगा? अच्छा तू यहाँ बैठ, मैं कहीं से ढूंढ ढांड के कुछ खाने को जुटाता हूँ।
The atmosphere becomes real only with incidental noise which will emphasize the emotion. So all these senses are important for being a film director, and Bimalda had all these things.
How to draw the line? Do we talk about the what's? Do we talk about the flaws? It depends on the focus. It depends on whether you're writing about in journalism. Suppose I were to give you an example. If you're writing an obit, you primarily talk about the impact the person would leave behind when he's no more. When you are reviewing a film or reviewing an award, say, you talk about how well deserved or whether something is wanting. So it depends. You cut your cloth once again according to the person you're going to treat, the material you have with you. When I'm writing about Mrinal Sen, there are so many aspects to write about. When I'm writing about Ritu Parno, who suddenly, one fine morning, I'm told he's dead. Ritu Parno Ghosh, director, again, young generation, he was a trendsetter. He was an inspiration to an entire generation. He was a departure. One fine morning, I'm suddenly told he's no more, and so come and write. My first reaction is, I can't believe it. I'm in tears, I'm sentimental. But the minute I go to the Times of India office and I sit down to write, a certain mechanism sets in. I distance myself from the little boy whom I had interviewed. I'm sorry, I'm using the word boy, but the young gentleman I had interviewed when he made Unish April, his first film that got him national recognition. Of course, Hiriranti also before that, but Unish April, suddenly we took note of an adult. He's no longer a baby Tabassum. He's no longer a master Ratan. He's no longer a child's artist. He's a grown-up actor, player. So that kind of a thing, a mechanism sets in. And you start looking at what he has done, the impact. And also, yes, the lament comes in. What if this had not happened? What if he had done that? There are ways and ways of bringing in the what. What if I did not have this black mole on my face? How would my face be?
Thank you so much, Ratna. Absolutely, at the end, I bring on an old friend of mine, Umesh Agarwal. Many years ago, Umesh was a director for serials and content for television, and we worked together. Today, he is a star, not just in my eyes, but in the eyes of the world. He has made this amazing series on A.R. Rahman.
really blessed with many beautiful creative artists or directors or movies I've worked with who are giving me so much of freedom. It's nice to sometimes come out and look at yourself in an objective way, and also it's a kind of test within you to see where you stand in the creative field, where you stand in your humanity.
Welcome, Umesh. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. Now, you know, the documentary is considered a rather boring kind of genre, and yet you chose that to cover this evergreen, dynamic, full of energy person called A.R. Rahman. The world recognizes the genius that he is. Now, why did you choose the documentary format?
You know, there was a time when documentaries used to document a particular time frame or a incident. These were essentially news reels, they were not documentaries. In recent decades, the narrative style of documentaries has gone through sea change. Now you have a definite storyline, you have characters. Even documentaries are divided into acts or scenes, whatever you may call. So, if a viewer is willing to come face to face with life, living characters, and experience life, I don't think there is any better format than a documentary film. And I opted for this format because I wanted to present real Rahman. Who is he? What does he think like? What are his thought processes? What goes on when he composes a music? And what happens? How each of his composition defies all boundaries. So since I wanted to capture all those movements, all those moments, that is the reason I opted for a documentary format.
Actually, by no accounts is this work a boring treatment. You seem to be having an eye on the international market as well when you have produced this amazingly slick production.
Mr. Rahman is no longer restricted to any particular physical boundary. We were aware that our viewers would be not only from India but from all parts of the globe. So we opted for packaging and treatment that meets international standards.
I'm actually warming up to the question I've been dying to ask you, which is how did you get the otherwise reticent A.R. Rahman talking about himself, his world, his music, things that are dear to him?
You know, those were early days. Today, if you can engage Mr. Rahman in an intelligent and in an informed discussion, he can be a great interviewee. The day we were supposed to record with Mr. Rahman, I took a production decision. We hired a camera person who was continuously shooting with Mr. Rahman because I didn't want him to be surrounded by strangers. Number two, while we were recording, I was there asking questions. The cameraman was hidden behind the camera and everybody else was removed from the floor because I didn't want him to be surrounded by strangers and people coughing and making some strange noises. And camera crews have the habit, of keep on adjusting things even when the shot is on. I didn't want Mr. Rahman to get distracted on any account. I wanted him to, listen to my question, internalize it, and then answer. So we created that atmosphere. That was number one. Number two, I had my questions. And I had written each of my questions in 4 to 5 different ways. So that if I don't get the required answer in the first go, I should be able to come back to it second time, third time, fourth time, until I get my answer. So these were the things that I employed, and I thought that we really got a brilliant interview from Mr. Rahman.
Do you think the camera does a better job than a pen in capturing the artist who is the central focus?
Camera captures everything. While editing, you can create a narrative, but you cannot change facial expressions, you cannot change pauses, you cannot change choice of words, where a writer can always manipulate his pen.
Recount some of the memorable moments of making this series.
There is one incident that I can never forget. One day after the interview, I wanted Mr. Rahman to play some of the theme tracks on piano. So Mr. Rahman on piano played theme track of Roja, Rangila, Bombay Dreams, and the cameraman was shooting and the audiographers were recording. And since we had to shoot from various angles, as a result, each track Mr. Rahman had to play 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So I would say that this was the first ever and perhaps the only personal concert that we had with Mr. Rahman. And this is such a fond memory that I think he will live forever with us.
When you're making a documentary series or even a documentary, does the artist clear the final work that you present, or is it through the eyes of the director?
To be frank, after Mr. Rahman gave his consent, he didn't want to know what we were doing, how we were doing. He gave us complete freedom. He supported us. Whenever we were stuck, he helped us. For example, I wanted to shoot at the studio of Steven Spielberg in Los Angeles. He sort of facilitated the permission for us. But besides that, no. It was my decision that I wanted to show him the cut before we go public. So I insisted. And on my insistence, he decided to watch the cut. And after watching it, he just called to say, Umesh, thank you. You have done a good job. And for a person like Rahman, who is a man of few words, this was more than enough. It was a validation of the work that we had done, but no interference, no supervision whatsoever. He respected the creative freedom that a filmmaker should have.
Umesh, thank you so much for sharing this exciting journey for yourself. I have watched some of the episodes of this documentary series and loved them. I can only hope that more and more people watch it, not just for the brilliance of Rahman, but for how well you have been able to frame this artist. It's truly remarkable. And with these words, we conclude this session of Rang Charcha. I'm Dr. Arshia Sethi, founder and managing trustee, Cree Foundation, and I thank very much Ralph for allowing us to be part of it this year as well. This was a special session titled Biopics and Biographies, Framing Artists in Film and Writing, curated and anchored by Dr. Arshia Sethi, founder and managing trustee, Cree Foundation, collaborator for Rang Charcha, part of Rangayan's Ralph 2021.